Welcome to Washington in Focus, your source for the week's top stories in the state of Washington. I'm Cole Lauterbach, managing editor for the Center Square Newswire service. This week, we'll be discussing Governor Jay Inslee's final State of the State address, legislation that supporters say would prevent foreign entities from interfering with Washington's elections, the EPA handing out millions for pricey new electric school buses in the Pacific Northwest, and the Spokane City Council being read the riot act over their proposal to limit public comment. That's ahead on Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach.
Knowledge is power, and you deserve to know what happens in your state government. That's why the nonprofit Franklin News Foundation is bringing you straight news journalism through the Center Square, reporting on state authorities and publishing stories that show where your money goes and who spends it. By supporting the Center Square, you can track politicians' use of taxpayer money and demand transparency from elected officials. This is how we can equip everyday Americans to hold their government accountable. Become a supporter of Franklin today at franklinnews.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach. Now let's jump into the headlines. Governor Jay Inslee gave his 11th and final State of the State speech this week, touting many of the economic and policy successes Washington State has seen in recent years, saying the state is stronger than ever. Joining me is the Center Square's Capitol correspondent, Carlene Johnson from Olympia. Carlene, what was your take on the speech?
Well, it was, I suppose, what we kind of expected it to be. A lot of discussion of all his accomplishments, right? Because he's going to be out of here after the end of this year, and so it was a lot of talk about environment, which is of course what his whole shtick was when he made that sort of run for presidency a while back, and the carbon emissions thing. He kept hitting on that again and again. Of course, we have the Climate Commitment Act, which is something he had pushed for at least a decade of his term. Finally got that through. And thus we have, 50 cents more a gallon in gasoline here in the state of Washington. And we have inflation out of control. And he kept saying, if you roll back the CCA, basically the sky is going to fall, right? Our children are going to be polluted. Mm-hmm. So it was lots of talk about that. He's got those initiatives coming up in this session, the 6 initiatives. And so he knows what he's up against. So I think it was more of an effort to say, hey, wait a minute, don't roll back everything that I've done while I've been here as your governor.
Yeah, a lot of that was kind of a legacy protection effort, I would say, right? Whereas, while the Climate Commitment Act has raised, we're looking at billions of dollars at this point. It's also increased the cost of the pump by, I think you said, $0.50 a gallon. And I think that still holds true at this point. And now the legislature is looking at, they have to address these 6 initiatives. One including is the potential repeal of the Climate Commitment Act. And now they're not going to do that on their own, which means it's likely going to go to the ballot. That is certainly going to have to be addressed as the new session begins, right, Carlene?
Absolutely. And in the Republican response right after the speech, Senator John Braun of Centralia, Republican, he said, whether it's how much you're paying at the grocery store for all your food, your gas, your housing, wages, of course, haven't kept up with inflation at all. On top of that, all of these regulations have made everything more expensive. And, they're forcing all of us into electric cars. And he says, when you show up at the gas station, you pay another 50 cents a gallon. The only difference there being the Climate Commitment Act. And so, of course, since that's been Governor Inslee's entire legacy, everything's about the environment. If that gets rolled back, and it looks like certainly there's the public momentum based on how many people sign these initiatives, if that gets rolled back, what will his legacy then be? Right. And so he's very concerned about making sure people understand that if we do that, the future is dire for your kids and grandkids.
Right. And one thing Republicans pointed out is that there was not much content about some of the more important issues facing Washingtonians, where they say crime is a major issue in the state. And it's something that needs to be, law enforcement needs to be enabled to properly do their jobs. You talk about the police pursuit initiative, right, things like that. That was almost a minor note in the governor's speech. People you talk to in Olympia, people that you speak with in your home and Federal Way, were they expecting more out of that?
Well, yeah, I think that the bulk of what people are concerned about right now, you mentioned, obviously inflation, gas prices, food prices, everything. We don't feel safe in our communities, right? He talks about the fentanyl crisis, absolutely, wanting a lot more, programs and facilities to be open for treatment. That's part of it, right? But the related part of that did not get any attention in the speech, or just a tiny bit. All of the drug-related crime. And then that circles back to the police pursuit restrictions, right? You've got cops not able to follow somebody in a smash and grab unless they can, actually see them coming out, and in a stolen vehicle, they cannot pursue. This is all related, and there seems to be no acknowledgement of the real suffering that communities like mine, Federal Way, are enduring because of all of these policies and no prosecution of the criminals.
Carlene, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. We now move on to editor Brett Davis. Washington State and Oregon, you reported, will soon get more than $51 million in federal funds for 144 electric school buses. That's money's being distributed across the Northwest. Brett, could you outline exactly where this money is going?
Sure. Beaverton School District in Oregon, they're getting about $19.75 million to purchase 50 buses. A school bus services provider called First Students Incorporated, they're getting about $16.5 million to purchase 46 buses in both states. Bus dealer RWC Group will receive more than $11.1 million to purchase 33 buses across Washington. And the Walla Walla Public School District here in Washington State will get $3.75 million to purchase 15 buses. This is part of the EPA's Clean School Bus Grant Program, which is itself part of the $1.2 trillion Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021. The program is set to provide $5 billion in total funding through fiscal 2026 for low and zero emission school buses. So far, the EPA has allocated about $2 billion to the program. The $51 million going to Oregon and Washington is part of an almost $1 billion doled out across the nation. And back in October 2022, Vice President Kamala Harris came to Seattle to introduce the initial award of nearly $1 billion. So I'm starting to sound like Carl Sagan, billions and billions.
And now, I went to school for journalism, so my math is not exactly the strongest, but $51 million for 144 buses equals into a good chunk of money. That each individual bus must be fairly pricey, correct? Especially compared to your conventional diesel bus.
Yeah, I was really surprised at how much electric school buses cost. They typically cost between $400,000 and $450,000, which is 3 times the price of your traditional diesel bus. Of course, proponents, they say that these buses are much cheaper to operate and they save school districts money in the long term. An interesting figure I came across while researching and writing this story was that on average, it costs about 14 cents a mile for a bus to recharge with electricity compared to 49 cents per mile for a bus to refuel with diesel. People who champion these electric buses, they also say, and I don't know how realistic this is, but I saw this a lot, that they can act as giant batteries. They can store surplus electricity when they're in use, meaning school districts can make money by selling power back to the grid during times of peak demand. I mean, that's all well and good, but all these savings come down the road, so to speak. So there are a lot of upfront costs that are pretty shocking for a lot of school districts, especially smaller rural districts that don't have a lot of money to throw around.
Exactly. I mean, and this technology still being new, you look back at like VCRs when they were initially made for sale were an exorbitant cost compared to what you could get for something much more technologically advanced now for a fraction of that cost. But in addition to that sticker shock, we've seen coverage of electric school buses showing issues like, battery replacement after it's 6 to 10 years, repair issues, because the issue is that these are different types of vehicles.
Right.
Where a normal shade tree mechanic that knows how to work his way around his or her way around a diesel engine is going to need an entirely different skill set to be able to repair one of these newly technologically advanced buses. And even the difficulties to tow an electric school bus is going to be difficult because these are massively heavy vehicles. These batteries are very, very heavy. And you would need an actual, like what you see, the semi-truck, tow trucks that would have to come out and tow one of these vehicles if it does, die in the street or something like that, and it breaks down outside of the school garage. All of those things can add up to a significant cost for taxpayers. And that's not even mentioning if, say, you're out in rural Washington, like, say, eastern Washington, where our reporter Randy Brock lives, you've got uphill, much more inclement weather. This all could lead to further degradation of the battery, which adds up to a much larger cost for taxpayers who are going to be on the hook for them.
Right.
What else did you find in that regard, Brett?
So I found the batteries make up anywhere from 30 to 50% of the cost of the bus. So you can imagine how expensive it would be to repair, let alone replace one of these batteries. I mean, 30 to 50% of $400,000 to $450,000. That's a big chunk of change. And you're talking about the maintenance. There have been issues there as well. A lot of these buses are often out of commission for longer than expected because of the time required to complete the repairs. And that's assuming you can even find someone to do the repairs in a timely fashion, as it's been difficult to find mechanics who know how to fix these electric buses. They're fairly new on the scene. There aren't a lot of people out there who know how to repair them. Towing these electric buses, which are typically heavier, thus requiring larger tow trucks. So apparently, and this is something I came across in researching the story, towing capacity should be about half the weight of the towing vehicle. And the typical electric school bus weighs in at 36,000 pounds. So you do the math.
Well, I mean, at 36,000 pounds, you're looking also at road grade issues,
right,
where in places where the roads freeze, and then come the inevitable thaw. That's why they have road postings all over the Midwest, Pacific Northeast, anywhere where you have a good winter frost. And then once it thaws, it's pothole season, right? With these larger vehicles that add more stress to the asphalt, this can't bode well in terms of an everyday, twice a day route for these sometimes rural electric school buses to be going over these roads that are vulnerable to potholes.
They're putting it bigger and deeper potholes.
Right, exactly, and that's not a problem in Washington yet. So, I mean, I don't have to worry about that now, I assume.
I haven't even mentioned the necessity of building out adequate charging infrastructure. So these school bus fleets can be deployed. In many cases, there's simply just not enough. There are not enough charging stations for electric buses, and then there are questions about whether or not the electrical grid can, handle the additional load. So.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm glad that Washington has such robust hydroelectric power coming from their dams, that they don't have to worry about, losing that base load power, right?
Right. In theory, anyway.
I kid. There's another story about how the Biden administration is looking to eventually open the window for those dams to be dismantled, I guess, taken down, blown up, however you'd say it, to help the salmon population on the Columbia. But you go back to these grants, Brett. We talk about all these extra costs. Would these grants pay for any of the extra, the battery replacement, the repair issues, maybe even help try and train up the school's mechanics to fix these vehicles should they break down? Is there details to pay for any of that in these grants that you found?
So the EPA's news release only mentions funds being used for the purchase of electric school buses, and I did some digging around, and I didn't come across anything that said otherwise. Still, I had a hard time believing that school districts, they could have money left over, if they only buy so many buses, and, why wouldn't they be able to use it for towing repairs and such? But I don't know that for sure. So I thought that would actually make a good follow-up story, because I actually found no information about that.
Yeah, no, I think that would be very enlightening to see if this is one of those situations where taxpayers are in favor of something like electric school buses or expanding Medicaid, but then all of a sudden the federal government subsidy does run out and taxpayers locally end up on the hook for something like that.
Right.
And, while supporters say costs of this will eventually drop as technology advances, VCRs weren't subsidized by the federal
I think this is just giving more ammunition to critics who say that government is putting the cart before the horse, as it were, when it comes to not just electric school buses, but electric vehicles in general. So I'm curious to see how this all plays out. Right.
Well beyond horses at this point. There's the electric carts to head kids to school, right? Okay. Hey, thank you, Brett. I appreciate it.
It's cool.
A new session in Olympia means new bills to scrutinize. One of those, if it gets the governor's John Hancock, would change the state's campaign finance law to ban what's called foreign influenced corporations from meddling in the state's elections. The current law bans foreign nationals from doing so. Investigative reporter TJ Martinell reported on this bill. TJ, what exactly could you explain is a foreign influenced corporation?
So that's the interesting thing about this bill is how it defines it. And it's defined as a for-profit corporation or LLC that has a foreign investor that owns 1% or more of the company's interest, or there's more than one foreign investor that owns 5% of the total ownership interest.
That comes off as very nebulous, right, as compared to what the current law is, where a foreign national is a foreign national. I mean, that is just, it is what it is. And now you add this added degree of complication to it. I'm curious what the intent of this measure is. I mean, that the supporters are saying, like, what's the goal?
Well, the goal is to prevent foreign meddling in elections through spending or through contributing to campaigns. But the problem is, how do you determine the ownership percentage? Because the way that the companies can be traded, you can own 1% 1 second and then not own 1% another second.
Right. If you're looking at a publicly traded company, you have the trading of said public entity on the markets happening every day in real time. I wonder if there's not going to be some sort of check-in date where first of every year they have to provide a report to the state of Washington to show, no, we're not owned by a foreign influence. We're not a foreign influence corporation. Here's our ownership list. I can only imagine what type of burden that would create. But the other question that comes to mind, and I think others brought this up, is this legal?
Well, that's a good question. There's been some court cases challenging these kind of policies because I think part of it is 1% of a company is not significant as far as saying it's foreign influence. That out of an entire company, for one person to have 1%, that company may not be very big. So the other issue is it's telling a U.S. company what it can do. I mean, they can form a separate PAC. That's one way to get around it, but it just costs. That's something that bigger companies could potentially do, but smaller companies can't do that. They just don't have the resources. The other question is, how do you enforce it? How do you know that they own 1% at the very moment that contribution was made?
Exactly. And as you say, 1% of a company, I mean, my 401k is invested, I could probably say almost 1% of a bunch of different companies, but that doesn't mean I have a say in what Apple does. I mean, it seems a little bit tricky to deem that company foreign influenced, even though such an infinitesimal amount might be coming from a foreign influence corporation, which in a worldwide economy, I can't imagine you're probably naming many of the companies that would have formerly participated in elections. And, this is a free speech issue, like you mentioned, where these companies, as Citizens United deemed, they technically are able to express their right of free speech, just like an individual American would, to say we are going to, post our influence into our local civic duty. Now, one lawmaker brought up a fascinating point about what you had mentioned about how this could actually be manipulated and weaponized to block local smaller businesses from participating in the democratic process. Explain that scenario, TJ.
Yeah, you simply have a foreign agent who's acting on your behalf buy up a bunch of ownership in the company up to 1%. And then as long as you hold that amount through the election cycle, they can't make any contributions. So you could inadvertently prevent, because if it's publicly traded, there's nothing that the company or corporation can do to prevent people from buying or selling. So they can't say, well, we don't want you to buy it because you're a foreign investor who's trying to prevent us from participating in an election. They can't do that. And The other one is that it goes back to the issue of how it's defined. One person testifying noted that it only applies to for-profit corporations. It doesn't apply to non-government entities like NGOs, nonprofits, and it doesn't apply to international labor unions. So those entities would be able to make donations, just not corporations.
We'll track this as it makes its way through the Capitol. Thank you, TJ. Now on to Eastern Washington. Reporter Randy Brock joins us with a wild one about Spokane City Council's attempt to change their policy about how often the public can have their voice heard before city officials, something that's been a staple in every city council for centuries, decades. Randy, just exactly explain what the city council was attempting to implement, please.
Well, the council's proposal is to revamp its open public forum policy. And this was kind of expressed Monday night. There was tentatively some action scheduled for it, but it received a lot of criticism from a number of citizens during that meeting. The individuals who spoke against it feel it's an attempt to suppress or silence their voices.
Explain the change, how, compare what they're proposing to the current system that is in place that they've had for a long, long time.
Well, under the current council rules, they allow up to 15 speakers who sign up in advance, either in person or online. They're allowed to voice their views with a 2-minute limit at the beginning of each weekly council meeting. These comments are supposed to be respectful, directed to the council president without singling out any other council members or city staff. What the proposal consists of, the open forum period would instead be restricted to just the third meeting of each month instead of the weekly meeting. But the number of speakers who would be allowed would be extended up to 40 speakers. During those particular meetings, the council would shorten its legislative business and only address items on a consent agenda. Well, according to the city documents, the change would, and this is a quote, increase opportunity for more diversity of speakers, many of them from historically excluded communities. Another motivation apparently is it would speed up the council business during each month's 3 other meetings. Unofficially, the proposal seems to stem from circumstances that have been ongoing since mid-October. Since then, the council's open forum sessions have been dominated by roughly 10 to 20 individuals who return each week to voice support for Palestinians, and they condemn the council's October 9 resolution that in turn expressed support for the nation of Israel's right to exist following the October 7 attack by Hamas terrorists. These complaints are repeated weekly. Many of the same speakers, they've also repeatedly called on the council to defund or reduce spending sent to the police department and instead use those monies towards social services, housing for the poor and disadvantaged.
Randy, so what happens moving next? Are they going to move forward with this?
Right now, Betsy Wilkerson, who's the council president, said the members expect to consider the revisions to the rules during their January 22nd meeting. The open forum change, if they adopt it, would be monitored in its new format, see how effective it is. Reportedly, though, the council may also decide to stick to its current weekly format, but move it to the end of the meeting so that the business agenda can be addressed first. So we shall see.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate it. And a big thank you to all of our journalists for sharing their stories. Stay up to date with all of these stories and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Cole Lauterbach, and until next time, this has been Washington in Focus.